Sanchez, a 13-year-old boy, committed a crime so brutal that it's hard to believe a teenager could do such a thing. He killed Amir El-Shamari, another 13-year-old, over something as trivial as a cell phone. It's the kind of senseless violence that makes you wonder what's going on in the minds of kids today. On the day of the murder, Sanchez didn't just snatch the phone and run. No, he went to extreme lengths to cover his tracks. Authorities say he tied up Amir, strangling him with a shoelace, and then used a drawstring from a hooded shirt to finish the job. It's chilling to think about the cold, calculated nature of this act. And all of this was done to keep anyone from finding out he'd stolen the phone. The level of premeditation is what makes this case stand out, turning what could have been a case for family court into one that landed Sanchez in adult court. Standing before the judge, Sanchez had little to say. His only words were an apology, but the judge clearly didn't think a simple sorry was enough, and he sentenced him to 9 years to life in prison. It's a sentence that reflects the gravity of the crime while still acknowledging Sanchez's young age. Sanchez will serve at least 9 years before he's eligible for parole, but to life means he could end up spending the rest of his life in prison. He'll start his sentence in a juvenile facility, and once he turns 16, he could be transferred to an adult high-security prison. It's a harsh reality for someone who's barely even started high school. This case has stirred up a lot of debate, especially around whether Sanchez should have been tried as an adult. His attorney argued that the case should have been handled in family court, where the focus is more on rehabilitation than punishment. But given the nature of the crime, the district attorney's office decided that Sanchez needed to be held fully accountable for his actions. And by pleading guilty to second-degree murder, Sanchez avoided a potentially much longer trial and more severe charges. The judge's decision to dismiss the other charges, first-degree sexual abuse, first-degree criminal sexual assault, and petty larceny, was part of his plea deal. It's a compromise of sorts, but it doesn't change the fact that a 13-year-old boy is dead, and another young life is now defined by a prison sentence. As Sanchez begins his sentence, he knows he'll be in a juvenile facility for at least a couple of years, but after that, his future is uncertain. Tristyn Bailey was just 13 years old, a bright and lively cheerleader full of promise, when her life was brutally cut short by someone she probably thought was a friend. Aiden Fucci, just 14 at the time, committed an act so violent and incomprehensible that it shook an entire community to its core. The details of what happened that night are chilling. Tristyn was last seen on surveillance footage walking with Fucci in the early hours of Mother's Day. The next time she was seen, it was when her body was found in a secluded wooded area, having been stabbed 114 times. The prosecution laid out the cold, hard facts, showing just how premeditated and vicious the attack was. But it wasn't just the gruesome details that left a lasting impact. It was a symbolic act carried out by Tristyn's family that truly brought the horror of the crime into stark reality. During the sentencing, each member of Tristyn's family walked up to the front of the courtroom one by one and dropped a heart-shaped stone into a glass jar. They did this 114 times, once for each stab wound Tristyn suffered. The sound of each stone hitting the glass echoed through the silent courtroom, each one a stark reminder of the pain and suffering that Tristyn endured. You could have heard a pin drop. No one moved, no one spoke. It was as if time stood still for those few minutes. The act was simple but incredibly powerful, a way for the family to make sure that every single one of those wounds was acknowledged. It wasn't just about the number, it was about the pain, the loss, and the cruelty that had been inflicted on their daughter, sister, and friend. And then there was Aiden Fucci, sitting there as the stones dropped into the jar, each one a symbol of what he had done. His reaction in court was telling. Fucci, who had initially shown little remorse, even going so far as to post a disturbing Snapchat from the back of a police car asking if anyone had seen Tristyn lately, finally offered a written apology during his sentencing. In his letter, he expressed regret and sorrow for what he'd done, acknowledging the pain he'd caused the Bailey family. But words, especially in a situation like this, can feel hollow. The judge, along with everyone else in that courtroom, had to weigh whether Fucci's remorse was genuine or just an attempt to mitigate his sentence. In the end, the judge wasn't swayed by Fucci's apology. The crime was too severe, too deliberate, for anything less than the maximum penalty allowable under Florida law. Fucci was sentenced to life in prison, a decision that reflected the gravity of his actions. The judge made it clear that there was no other appropriate sentence for such a heinous crime. After the sentencing, Tristyn's family gathered outside the courtroom wearing shirts that read, "That's my squad," in Tristyn's favorite color, teal. They were relieved that justice had been served, but it was a bittersweet victory. No sentence could bring Tristyn back or erase the horror of what had happened, but for them, the life sentence was a step towards closure, a way to ensure that Aiden Fucci would never be able to hurt anyone else. Gavin Smith was just 16 years old when he committed a crime so brutal and so shocking that it left an entire community in disbelief. Smith didn't just take one life, he annihilated his entire family. In a single horrifying night, he murdered his mother, stepfather, and 2 younger brothers, leaving a scene of unimaginable horror behind. What makes this case even more chilling is the cold, calculated nature of the killings. Smith shot his mother and stepfather in the head while they were asleep, ensuring they had no chance to defend themselves. Then he turned the gun on his 2 younger brothers, one of whom was just 3 years old. The youngest was found hiding under a bed, a tragic testament to the terror he must have felt in his final moments. When Gavin Smith walked in for his sentencing, there was no sign of remorse. His face was blank, his demeanor almost detached, as if he were disconnected from the gravity of what he'd done. Smith offered a brief apology during the proceedings, but it was empty, almost mechanical. It's the kind of apology that doesn't really mean anything because it lacks the one thing that could make it real: genuine regret. The families of the victims didn't hold back as they gave their statements. They spoke about the loved ones they'd lost, the devastation of losing not just 1, but 4 family members in such a violent and senseless way. The judge didn't mince words when it was time to deliver the sentence. He called Smith's actions pure evil, and it was clear that he saw no redeeming qualities in the young man before him. Smith was sentenced to life in prison for each of the murders, a sentence that reflected the heinous nature of his crimes. The judge's harsh words were a direct response to the brutality of the murders and the lack of any real remorse shown by Smith. However, because Smith was only 16 at the time of the murders, state law mandated that he would be eligible for parole after 15 years. It's a technicality that left many in the courtroom feeling uneasy, knowing that there was a possibility, however slim, that Smith could one day walk free. Julio Rivera's story is one of desperation, violence, and the severe impact that his actions had on the lives of others. Rivera wasn't just involved in a single criminal act, he was part of a string of violent carjackings that terrorized the community. Over a short period, he managed to leave a trail of fear and trauma in his wake, with his most notorious crime being the attempted carjacking that nearly ended a woman's life. In November 2021, Rivera shot Alana Castaneda in the face during a failed carjacking attempt. She survived, but the physical and emotional scars were something she would carry with her forever. When it came time for Alana to speak in court, the weight of what Rivera had done was clear in every word she spoke. Alana had already undergone 3 surgeries and faced the prospect of more to come, each one a reminder of the violence she endured. In her statement, she didn't just speak for herself, she spoke for all the victims of Rivera's carjackings. There was a mixture of pain and resilience in her words, an acknowledgement of what she'd lost and what she'd fought to reclaim. As Rivera stood in court, he offered an apology to Alana, and it was one of those moments where the air in the room felt heavy with tension. His apology was direct. He acknowledged what he'd done, the pain he'd caused, and expressed regret for his actions. For Alana, Rivera's apology brought a mix of emotions. There was some comfort in knowing that he was sorry, but it didn't erase the trauma or the years of recovery ahead of her. The court handed down a 45-year sentence, and for Alana, this felt like justice. It wasn't just about punishing Rivera, it was about ensuring that he couldn't hurt anyone else. The years Rivera would spend behind bars wouldn't undo what had happened, but they would at least bring some measure of safety and justice. Alana's tears weren't just for what she had endured, they were for all the victims who'd been affected by Rivera's actions. Rivera's family had pleaded for leniency, painting a picture of a young man who'd fallen in with the wrong crowd, driven by circumstances beyond his control. They argued that he'd grown up without his biological mother and had been influenced by bad people. But as compelling as their plea was, it didn't change the fact that Rivera had made his choices. The judge, recognizing the gravity of the crimes, was firm in delivering a sentence that reflected the severity of Rivera's actions. Nohema Graber was 66 years old, probably thinking about retirement, enjoying her walks in the park, and teaching Spanish at Fairfield High School. On November 2nd, 2021, everything changed. Miller, angry over a bad grade, teamed up with his friend Jeremy Goodale to commit a crime that's hard to even wrap your head around. They planned it out, stalked her, and then, in an act of pure violence, beat her to death with a baseball bat. When the dust settled and the investigation began, it didn't take long for the authorities to zero in on Miller and Goodale. Within hours of finding Graber's body hidden under a tarp in a park, the two were arrested. They were just teenagers, but the crime was so heinous that they were charged as adults. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment act. It was calculated, planned, and executed with chilling precision. In the courtroom, Miller faced the judge and was sentenced to life in prison, but with the possibility of parole after serving 35 years. During the sentencing, Miller spoke to the court, apologizing to Graber's family and the community. He admitted to his role in the murder, but one word he used stood out: carelessness. That word feels so inadequate to describe what happened. The prosecutor even mentioned how that word didn't fit the gravity of the crime, which was anything but careless. It was deliberate. What really hits hard are the victim impact statements from Graber's family. Her son, Christian, addressed Miller directly, saying he had no hate in his heart for him, showing he was someone who inspired love and forgiveness, even in the darkest of times. The prosecutor, Chauncey Moulding, who helped put Miller behind bars, talked about the community's pain and the devastating impact of the crime. Fairfield is a small town, and Graber was someone who connected with her students in the community. Her loss is felt deeply by everyone who knew her. And then there's the question of why Miller decided to take a plea deal at the last minute. According to Moulding, it might have been an attempt to avoid airing all the gruesome details in court, details that would have haunted Miller's future even more than the sentence itself. It's hard to know for sure, but what's clear is that the evidence was overwhelming, and the chances of him walking free were slim to none. Let us know your thoughts about these cases in the comments, and keep up with the latest courtroom moments by subscribing to Court Uncovered.